5 bloodlines, 5 major American wars, millions of bodies buried in foreign soil, while profits flowed into vaults that never seemed to fill. Is there a pattern in the history of American power? Not a conspiracy whispered in the dark, but a structural pattern hidden in plain sight. A business model that does not rely on innovation alone, but on contracts signed in the shadow of gunfire. A system where war becomes not only a geopolitical event, but an economic engine. This is not merely political commentary. It is an examination of how modern warfare became one of the most stable and protected industries in human history. The story begins in the early 19th century with the rise of industrial America. In 1802, on the banks of the Brandywine River, a French immigrant named Eleuthère-Irénée DuPont founded a gunpowder mill. Over time, the DuPont Company would become one of the primary suppliers of explosives in the United States. During the War of 1812, the Mexican-American War, and especially the American Civil War, the demand for gunpowder surged dramatically. War did not create the company, but war accelerated its growth. By World War I, DuPont had transformed into an industrial giant. Between 1914 and 1918, its profits increased exponentially as artillery shells and explosives were shipped in vast quantities to Europe. Like many industrial firms of the era, it later diversified into chemicals, synthetic materials, nylon, Teflon. Yet its early expansion was undeniably tied to wartime production. Then there was oil. No modern army moves without fuel. In the late 19th century, John D. Rockefeller built Standard Oil into a near monopoly, at one point controlling roughly 90% of U.S. oil refining capacity. When navies shifted from coal to oil-powered ships, petroleum became a strategic asset as vital as steel. Energy companies sold fuel to governments. Governments went to war. The connection between oil and military power became inseparable. During both world wars, American corporations, including oil and chemical firms, operated within a complex global trade system. Investigations later examined certain business dealings, technology exchanges, and patent agreements. These cases highlight an uncomfortable truth. In global capitalism, corporate interests and national loyalties do not always align cleanly. War, after all, reshapes markets as much as borders. Finance played its role too. Modern wars are staggeringly expensive. Governments borrow, bonds are issued, banks facilitate the flow of capital across continents. During World War I, major financial institutions in New York arranged large loans for Allied powers before the United States formally entered the war. By 1917, America's economic ties to Britain and France were deeply entrenched. When the U.S. joined the conflict, it did so amid political, strategic, and economic pressures intertwined in ways historians still debate. War creates debt. Debt creates leverage. Reconstruction creates opportunity. And then came the age of aerospace and advanced weapons. Companies such as Lockheed, Boeing, and later Lockheed Martin became central players in the Cold War defense buildup. Jet fighters, missile systems, satellites, stealth bombers, the price tags climbed into the hundreds of billions. Take the F-35 program, projected lifetime costs exceeding $1 trillion. It is one of the most expensive military programs in history. Supporters call it necessary for national security. Critics call it emblematic of cost overruns and contractor influence. What is undeniable is this: defense contracts sustain entire regions, employ hundreds of thousands, and generate enormous shareholder value. The revolving door between government and industry, retired generals joining defense boards, executives taking advisory roles in Washington, raises persistent ethical questions. Not proof of a secret empire, but evidence of a tightly woven ecosystem. Then there are logistics giants like Halliburton, which secured massive contracts during the Iraq War. Billions were spent on infrastructure, fuel supply, private security, and reconstruction services. Some contracts were later scrutinized for cost inflation or lack of competitive bidding. The pattern repeats. Conflict erupts. Emergency funding is approved. Contracts are awarded. Share prices rise. Vietnam saw more than 7 million tons of bombs dropped, more than during all of World War II. Iraq and Afghanistan together cost the United States over $2 trillion. These are not abstract numbers. They represent decades of borrowing, taxation, and long-term debt. Meanwhile, U.S. national debt has surpassed $34 trillion. Is every war fought for profit? No. History is more complex than a single motive. But does war create powerful economic incentives? Absolutely. President Dwight D. Eisenhower warned of this dynamic in 1961 when he spoke of the military-industrial complex. He did not accuse families by name. He described a structural alliance between the armed forces, industry, and political institutions, a system capable of shaping policy through budgetary gravity alone. When threat narratives intensify, defense budgets expand. When budgets expand, contractors grow. When contractors grow, their political influence expands. This does not require a secret council in a dark room. It requires incentives. In the 21st century, the battlefield is evolving. Cyber warfare, artificial intelligence, autonomous weapons systems. The next generation of defense contracts may be written not in steel and gunpowder, but in code. The question is not whether corporations profit from war. They do. The deeper question is whether democratic systems can balance national security with accountability. Because when profits are privatized and costs are socialized, when shareholders gain while taxpayers absorb long-term debt, the burden shifts silently to future generations. Every time a new security crisis dominates headlines, markets respond. Defense stocks fluctuate, energy prices surge, financial institutions adjust their portfolios. This is not mythology, it is the arithmetic of modern geopolitics. War reshapes supply chains. War reshapes currencies. War reshapes power. And while soldiers fight on the front lines, accountants track margins far from the battlefield. The danger is not in recognizing this pattern. The danger is in oversimplifying it. History is rarely controlled by 5 names or a single bloodline. It is shaped by networks of influence, corporations, politicians, investors, voters, institutions, all operating within a system that rewards growth, security, and expansion. The military-industrial system did not emerge overnight. It evolved over 2 centuries of industrialization, global conflict, technological competition, and financial innovation. The real debate is not about secret rulers. It is about transparency, oversight, incentives. Can war ever be separated from profit in a capitalist system? Can defense spending be restrained in an era of geopolitical rivalry? Can voters meaningfully influence trillion-dollar security architectures? These are uncomfortable questions, but they are necessary ones. Because if war becomes too economically comfortable, if it becomes a dependable revenue stream, then peace becomes disruptive. And disruption is rarely welcomed by entrenched interests. The pattern may not be a hidden conspiracy, but it is a visible structure. A structure where weapons, fuel, finance, and logistics intersect, where crises accelerate capital flows,
where public fear can justify private gain. Understanding that structure is not about cynicism, it is about awareness. Because democracies do not collapse only from external enemies. They weaken when citizens stop asking who benefits and why. And in the end, the most powerful force against corruption is not secrecy, it is scrutiny.